Welcome to episode negative 11 of Successful Demo. In each episode, I analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more existing cards. We continue on our journey to revisit resurrected cards from System Core. First it was Eli 1.0, now it's Fetal AI, or as I like to call it, Fetal AI. This was Netrunner's very first defensive agenda. Veterans would remember from the core set days that every single agenda was squishy, right? When an agenda was stolen, it provided no benefit for the corp nor any downside to the runner. Fetal AI changed that paradigm by introducing the ambush subtype to the agenda. Now when you steal it, you've got to pay the 2 net damage and 2 credits, and that's a very powerful ability back in the day. When corps typically leaked too many agendas, they found themselves swarmed with agendas on HQ, unable to push them out in time, making it ripe for the picking for runners. Fetal AI gave Jinteki the unique advantage that when the runner attempts to play aggressively, they get punished by the tempo hit that is the 2 net damage and 2 credits from Fetal AI. Now, this is a powerful and unique ability, and thus it was mitigated by a fairly strong downside as well. The 5 advancement costs, making the agenda ratio very lousy. If you think about it, 2 agenda points are usually worth 3 or 4 advancements. 5 is just way too much. For that same cost, you could be scoring a 5-3 agenda instead, giving you a whole agenda point more. And that brings us to our point of comparison, Obokata Protocol, and a later agenda that basically does the same thing as Fetal AI with a better agenda ratio. Now, there are some subtleties that differentiate the two. Advanced players would know about this, but I'll highlight them anyway. Obokata's 4 net damage is an additional cost, whereas the 2 net damage on Fetal AI is an on-access effect, much like Snare. And this difference makes Fetal AI a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is better than Obokata because the net damage is forced onto the runner whether they want to steal the agenda or not. Right? The runner can choose to decline stealing the Obokata in order to not take the 4 net damage, whereas with Fetal AI, the 2 net damage is dealt on access. On the other hand, the bad thing about this is that the runner can avoid the net damage, or rather I should say prevent the net damage with cards like Feedback Filter and Caldera. If they do, they will still be able to steal Fetal AI, whereas with Obokata Protocol, you can't prevent the net damage and still steal the agenda, right? You didn't pay the 4 net damage cost, you don't get to steal it. So those are the upsides and downsides. Also take note that Fetal AI's net damage does not fire from archives. While the runner still has to pay 2 credits to steal Fetal AI from archives, they don't have to take the 2 net damage because a clause in Fetal AI explicitly says so. Now, we talked about how Obokata has a way superior agenda ratio than Fetal AI, and that is actually a very big deal that differentiates the 2 agendas. Firstly, you would more rather run Obokata Protocol in a deck that wants to score 7 agenda points, because Obokata Protocol gets you there faster. But more importantly, even in prison decks, Obokata Protocol is more agenda dense. It packs more agenda points in a single agenda. This leaves you with more dangling deck slots to use for non-agenda cards, your important ice, your money, your assets. So yeah, you would much rather play Obokata Protocol in that scenario simply because it lowers your agenda density. Final difference is that Obokata is on the most wanted list, while Fetal AI is not. So if you're looking to run some other powerful most wanted list card, you might want to consider whether it's worth it or not to forego the Obokata and use the tier 2 Fetal AI agenda instead. So yeah, having Obokata and Fetal AI makes for very interesting deck building decisions. Do you run Obokata or Fetal? Tough to say. But if you're like me and you're the expanding brain in the expanding brain meme, you would tell yourself, why not run both? And that is my biggest gripe with with Fetal AI being brought back from the dead in System Core. The fact that it coexists with Obokata Protocol. This makes it a fertile breeding ground for net damage based prison decks, because now you can have an agenda suite that is made up of 15 of 20 agenda points guarded by net damage. that is pretty defensive and very oppressive, especially considering that Jinteki has other defensive agendas in their suite as well, like the Future Perfect. Yeah, if you remember my sync deck from 2016, you use the same concept basically, a critical mass of defensive agendas that makes it basically utterly oppressive to any runner who's not ready to deal with the deck archetype. In that case, a tag-based archetype. If you're tagged, you can't steal quantum predictive models. They go to me instead, and they get exchanged for your big global foods that aren't even worth that many points. Same thing here. If you're not ready to deal with a deck that's all in on net damage, you'll find yourself unable to steal these agendas, and that's pretty nasty. Especially considering that the one silver bullet against these agendas in Film Critic has been nerfed because it was put on the most wanted list. So yeah, good luck dealing with these agendas. Right? As of now, I can't really think of any existing decks that are tier 1 net damage prison decks there is, but it is a design space that the designers have to be very cautious with as they continue printing new Jinteki cards ahead in the new Nisei cycles, right? The more powerful if you gather a critical mass of powerful net damage cards, this nightmare of a net damage prison deck could become a reality. So I think Industrial Genomics is the best place to play a Fetal AI Obokata deck. But that's not really my style. Prison decks are not that fun. So I instead went to build a proactive deck instead, a Palana deck that actually attempts to score 7 agenda points using this agenda suite. Now this is a very special deck, I think, because it runs a crap ton of money cards, shall we say. Holy cow, 14 money cards plus our Palana ID. NGO Friends, 3 copies of Rashida, 3 copies of Hedge Fund, 3 copies of IPO, and 2 copies of Celebrity Gift with the Palana ID that gives us usually 1 credit a turn. That's a ridiculous amount of money. Most other decks don't even run 12 money cards. So that is absolutely crazy. But we need every single credit of it because we are going to build a nasty big wall and we are going to pay for it. Every single money is coming out of our pocket to res those 8 big eyes. 2 copies of Chiashi, 3 copies of DNA Tracker, and 3 copies of Anansi. These are expensive eyes, an average res cost of over 9. It is just unbelievable that we're running so many big eyes, because in other big ice decks I've played, there's always a way to cheat those eyes into play, be it Mutate, Accelerated Beta Test, or Eliza's Toy Box. No such thing here. We are playing very honest Glacier Netrunner, and we are just using these big ice to threaten the runner, give them a lose-lose situation. Either they spend crap tons of money breaking out absolute units of ice, or they run through them. Anansi and DNA Tracker are porous, but they deal net damage, so by the time they get to the bottom of our server, they will find themselves low on cards, unable to steal the Fetal AIs and Obokata protocols awaiting them. Nisei is still a squishy agenda, but we do need some form of offense, some way to score, some agendas that we actually want to score. So that explains the agenda suite, and it's time to watch in action in the gameplay video. Today we are up against Neela Patel, a runner that we want to play passively against anyways, because if we rush too aggressively early on and attempt to score that Nisei in our hand, they'll simply bounce our HQ eyes and do a bunch of nasty stuff like diversion of funds. Our opening hand is pretty nice because we have Hedge Fund into 2 big eyes, so if our opponent attempts to face check HQ or R&D turn 1, they will be greeted with some nasty net damage. So because of the Hedge Fund, we were able to threaten ice like DNA Tracker and Anansi, and as a result, our opponent doesn't run on their first turn. Now, usually I would put the Thimble Rig on the remote on Archives instead to defend against the Sneak Door Beta, a very common card that Leela runs. We don't want to get the 4 agenda points in our hands stolen right off the bat. The reason I chose to put it on the remote was firstly because I had the Rashida. So we definitely want to fire Rashidas while we can. The second reason was because our opponent was rather poor at that time, so I didn't really see them going for an aggressive Sneak Door there. Right, so now we show up archives because we don't want them to sneak door, and we start considering our options. We could try to score the Nisei here, but I think that's a bit too premature. Against Neela Patel, you cannot simply install advanced like most other runners, because if you only install advanced Nisei and you attempt to score the Nisei, sure you have a Nisei score, but then they'll bounce your ice and cause a lot of trouble. So what we actually want to do is to get to a point where we can double advance the Nisei Mark II. So unfortunately, the NGO front has to go out in the open because server 1 was hogged by the Nisei Mark II. But this gives us the money needed to then double advance the Nisei here. So you against Neela Patel, it is very important to bring yourself to a board state where firstly you can over advance your agendas. That way, you can score your agendas and still have a click remaining to counter the Leela bounce. The second thing you want to do is to ensure that your centrals are heavily fortified so that they cannot run your centrals, steal an agenda, and then use Leela's ability to bounce your Nisei back to your hand, causing you to lose precious time. So here we're going to double advance the Nisei and score it. This leaves us with one remaining click. If they bounce our HQ ice, we are putting it back onto HQ. No question is asked. Our opponent does something interesting though. They bounce the Chiashi on our remote. Right? So because they did that, leaving a Thimble Rig on our remote, that actually changes things. We are not in urgent need of a Chiashi on the remote. Why not do something more productive with our final click, like trying to go for the second Rashida? So that makes a lot of sense. We're going to put the Rashida behind a Thimble Rig. Given that our opponent doesn't have a decoder out, this seems pretty safe. They could inside job it, but hey, at least that forces out a bypass card. So that doesn't happen. Instead, they use hostage to get the ESOPs out at long last so that they can finally pawn their caches. Hey, that's another criminal using ESOP's cash. Haha, that's catching on here, I see. Alright, so we draw into more money. IPO is wonderful here, and we're gonna replace our remote ice. Thanks to our opponent who bounced back our Chiashi. Here I realized that Anansi does a way better job at defending the remote than Chiashi does, because Chiashi can be easily broken by our opponent for 11 credits with Kuroda, whereas they don't really have a sentry breaker just yet. So Anansi seems good. Also cheaper to rest than Chiashi, so we'll go for it. Our opponents continue setting up their run-based rig, while I simply play preemptive action here. So preemptive action is an important card in a deck that wants to go slow like mine, because that way we are able to recycle those money cards. Trust me, 14 money cards isn't enough. We want more copies of them in our deck. Preemptive action gets them back. We also replace our Archives Ice because Thimble Rig is kind of squishy at this point, and I'm kind of worried about a surprise sneak door at this point. Better have some thicker ice that can not only tax them out but also basically stop them from farming archives with data suckers. Right. I draw border control here. Border control almost always goes on the remote, but I then realized that it's actually a very valuable HQ guarding tool. As long as there's a border control on HQ, they cannot safely play a diversion of funds or embezzle. I'm going straight for it here. Seems good, right? I don't really think I need the border control on the remote because between Nisei Mark II counter and my thick ice, like spelled THICC, thick ice, there's no way they're gonna be able to steal my agendas in the remote, especially if they are those defensive net damage agendas. Okay. So we draw yet another copy of Rashida. Is it time to play the Rashida? I think so. It's either play Rashida here or attempt to score an agenda, and personally at this point, I don't really feel comfortable scoring Obokata or Fetal AI yet. Those are not really agendas you want to score. So yeah, we do this, we protect the server, and we're kind of fine with leaving 8 agenda points in our hand because, as I mentioned at the start of the video, they are protecting themselves. The fact that they deal net damage mitigates the possibility of our opponent stealing them all in one fell swoop. What I'm really concerned about is the 7 credit program, Amina. This is the decoder. That is bad news. My DNA trackers and Thimble Rigs are basically dead at this point. I can't res any code gates in their face, otherwise I will lose money. And even though I look rich, 22 credits to my opponent's 27 with an outstanding NGO front, trust me, those credits will vanish very quickly once I start resing ice. Better hope they don't have emergency shutdown. That's a hard counter to my deck. Now you see here I go for the install advanced, single advanced bluff. I'm hoping to induce some runs on the remote so that I can drag them through the Anansi. It's an NGO front in the remote, but my opponent doesn't take the bait. Instead, they set up their final breaker in Nanok K. So I'm going to rest the Ginger Grid here. No ice drawn. Most of my ice have already been drawn. I'm going to cash out my NGO for half the money because I want to install double advanced Nisei here. As I explained before, you need to install double advanced Nisei so that you don't get bounced out via Leela. And my opponent has some really scary run-based cards going on right now. Paragon, Double Data Sucker, and Crowdfundings in the bin. So I bamboozled my opponent with the single nastiest ice they can possibly face. The Anansi at 5 strength versus the Nanok K at 2 strength meant that they had to pay 9 credits for that Anansi. I let them through archives here because it's a DNA tracker on archives and I don't want to lose that much money to the Amina. So they do take a breach dome damage, which is really nice. They sold their security testing to Aesop's Pawn Shop, so they can't just farm archives with security testing. Now the bad news is they do play a mining accident here, and you never want to take the bad pub as a Glacier deck. But given how flooded I am with agendas, I think I can take the bad pub here and quickly rush out the game to close it off. So now they run HQ here, which leaves me very concerned. This is not looking good for me, but I'm going to risk it. I'm going to res most of my ice. This is the last click run, so I'm able to go all the way down to 4 credits. You see that if I took the 5 credit punishment from mining accident, I wouldn't have been able to afford these ice. So now the question is, do I fire and end the run? I chose not to, gambling on the 60% chance that they will hit a non-agenda instead. Unfortunately, they hit one of the 2 cards I was hoping they would avoid, the Fetal AI or the Nisei. Now here is where I realized I made a huge boo-boo. This was a very big mistake. They made 3 successful runs last turn, so they got all their crowdfundings back. Had I remembered about the crowdfundings in their bin, I would most certainly have fired and end the run there. It was worth it to trade a Nisei counter and a potential agenda access for 9 credits. Instead, they get their crowdfundings and now my Nisei was bounced back to hand. I'm forced to rescore it again. This is a huge turning point in the game. My opponent continues sieging HQ. Thankfully, the Anansi at 4 strength holding up nicely against the Nanok K, but they easily subdue it with their Data Sucker counters. Normally, you need to pay 3 credits to boost that Nanok K to meet Anansi's strength, but my opponent just has to use Sucker counters, so that's really convenient for them. Thankfully, they are ignoring my remote completely. I don't really have money to res all the ice, so I do get a second Nisei counter out. It's tough. It's not really a lot of consolation because now my opponent has 1 bad publicity and a lot of run-based momentum going. 6 Data Sucker counters and lots of money to break ice with. This is not looking good. I pitch a Nisei into the bin because firstly, I'm not going to score the 3rd Nisei. I'm going to go straight for the Obokata win. And secondly, it's very unlikely that they run archives for access anyway. Right? They know there's a breach dome in there. They got hit by it, so they are not going to run archives for normal accesses anymore. They're just going to go on HQ and R&D, as you see here. My opponent runs HQ here. There's no reason for me to stop the run since it's just a single access normal run. And they access a Chiashi, all good. They are running very well, exactly on 4 cards, so they can steal Obokatas and Fetal AIs. And they're breaking all my ice with ease. Right, this is where I really start regretting my life choices, giving my opponent the bad publicity, and not ending the run on HQ. Those crowdfundings have ticked down, and they are now threatening to make another 3 successful runs. Right, they ran HQ, now they're running my remote, attempting to trash the Ginger. I was very, very tempted to fire a Nisei token here. I have 2 of them after all. The reason I didn't was because letting them through my remote is fine because they are not gaining anything out of the remote run except for a successful run. They aren't gaining Data Sucker counters. That's very important. So it is less valuable than the central run, especially considering that there are no important cards in the remote. So I just let them trash the Ginger, which interestingly brought them down to 4 credits. So that actually took some steam out of their wins. Because of this, when they attempted to run my HQ, as their 3rd successful run this turn, it was very easy for me to say, nope, no successful run for you, I'm going to end the run. I used the Nisei token here instead of the border control because This leaves the border control in place so that if they run HQ subsequently, they have to pay 2 credits using Corroder. So that's quite important. Right, we draw hedge fund here. That's good money. Most people would reflexively play the top deck hedge fund here. But then I considered the board state and I realized that there was no way I was going to win the late game battle. My opponent had my number. Right, with this efficient breaker suite, Corroder doesn't seem like the best breaker to break Shiashi, and Nanotke doesn't seem like the best breaker to break Anansi, but with Data Sucker support, especially Double Sucker, there was no way I was going to stop my opponent from raking in the cash and breaking things very cheaply, especially after conceding a bad publicity. So I realized I had to go for the win now. It was now or never. So, I just iterated through every single possibility. I knew they would start the next turn with 4 credits because ESOPs will sell something. Actually, 5 credits because then crowdfunding will also trigger. They would most likely sell their dorm computer with 4 counters on it. So they'll start the turn with 5 credits. With the bad pub, they can easily run through my remote Anansi twice and steal any Obokatas I had in there because they have exactly 4 cards in hand. Actually, they'll go up to 5 cards at the start of their turn. There was no way I was going to be able to defend my Obokata, but my best hope here was to force them to steal my remote Obokata and then try to score the second one the next turn. Or the turn after. I won't have enough money to score the second one. So here I go. You're just going to brazenly install double advance. Maybe they think it's an NGO. After all, they haven't really been challenging my advanced cards in my remote, instead electing to hammer centrals to bounce the remote agenda instead. So now the ball's in their court. I can only hope that they don't run the remote twice, because if they do, they've got me. They've got my Obokata, they'll be at match point, and that is a tough place to be. So to my delight, actually to my surprise, they run R&D here, the worst possible server. I'm doing a quick agenda count here. There's 3 agendas in score areas, 2 agendas in my hand, 1 agenda in my remote, and 1 Nisei, sneaky Nisei in the bin. That's 7 of my 9 agendas. Of my 22 cards in R&D, 2 are agendas, right? They are both stealable, unfortunately, because my opponent has a full hand, but I am more than willing to take the 2 in 22 risk, even if my opponent dumps all their turning wheel counters on R&D. In this case, because they knew of the threat of the Nisei counter, they only spent 1 set of turning wheel counters, so they're going to access 2 cards. And I happily permitted them to do so anyway. It is much more likely that they will steal an agenda from HQ with a 40% chance, or the remote and archives. That's a 100% chance if they get in. I would much rather save my enderruns for those servers. So, here goes the access. 2 cards coming up very shortly. Right, they both seem to be misses. If they hit an agenda here, I'm kind of done. They bounce the Obokata back into my hand, and I don't really have any money to score it. Instead, they fall short, and now they have to find another vector to attack. This R&D run drained them of quite a bit of money. They paid 2 real credits to get past the Anansi. So when they came into HQ, I realized that they were completely out of credits. This run drained them of every single credit. All I had to do was to end the run using border control. How can they make any more runs? They have no money left. The 1 bad pub isn't going to get you through. Oh shit. Oh no. I put a Nisei in my bin, and now it's going to cost me the game. They're going to steal it and bounce the remote Obokata, stopping me from winning the game. No, I have to end the run here. And then I'm going to pull a very sick bluff here. I'm going to say, oh shit, that was supposed to be an apocalypse ending Nisei end the run, but I forgot that I actually ended the run on HQ, right? So I was bluffing this as, oh, I see you're trying to apocalypse me, so I'm ending the run on archives. But oh shit, I clicked that button too soon and didn't realize that you couldn't have apocalypse me anyway, because I already ended the HQ run. There was no successful HQ run. They couldn't have apocalypse even if I hadn't used the Nisei there. And that was apparently enough to stop them from running my archives one last time, because on their last click, they ran HQ and let Anansi fire. Okay, so that basically guarantees me the game. So what happens here is Anansi does 4 net damage, putting them down to 1 card in hand. They cannot steal any of my agendas because they only have 1 card left. They could attempt to draw with Anansi, but because they started the run with only 1 credit, right? The one bad publicity, they cannot use Anansi's ability to draw. That requires 2 credits. And you'll notice that they can't steal the Fetal AI in my hand either, even if they had a lot of cards. They don't have the 2 credits. So because they were poor, my opponent couldn't steal my agendas. They're gonna use all their turning wheel counters to access 3 cards, a hedge fund, a Rashida, and in true classic successful demo fashion, we flatline them with Fetal AI. Hey, we got a kill! And it's not even like we played a dedicated kill deck anyway. I think that's the most important part, right? The flat line didn't really matter in the end because we were gonna win off 7 agenda points anyway. The main takeaway here is that for a hybrid net damage / agenda scoring deck to work, you need to have a way to score agendas, and this is why I run Nisei Mark II in my deck. Getting to match point allows you to pressure the runner into making careless runs such as the one on HQ and trip themselves up unnecessarily by accessing Fetal AI on less than 2 cards anyway. Yeah, so indeed, Fetal AI and Obokata Protocol are a pretty deadly duo. It felt so good that even though I had 2 agendas in HQ at the end of the game, when my opponent made a HQ run, I knew for a fact that I was coming out alive. They were not able to steal either of them. That's how good it feels playing an oppressive agenda suite. And that's the deck theory simply coming into practice. My opponent said, I'm not going to break your porous Anansi. And I told them, well, you're not stealing my agendas then. Too bad. Breach Dome was absolutely amazing as well. It prevented my opponent from farming money and crowdfundings and data suckers from archives, and also gave me a reason to ditch the Nisei Mark II in the bin, which actually worked out. If my opponent ran archives on the last click, I was completely screwed. I would have regretted my life choices, but as it turned out, I don't know if my opponent saw the Apocalypse bluff even, but hey, it worked, right? They ran HQ last click instead of archives last click. I definitely had the option to save my Nisei by shuffling it back into my deck with preemptive action, but I think I left it in archive simply because I didn't want to increase the agenda density on R&D, which is always very risky when your opponent has access to multi-access on R&D, especially if they are Leela Patel. So that was the thinking behind leaving the Nisei in the bin, and it worked out in the end. That being said, I think there were areas where I could have definitely improved my gameplay. Most notably, had I denied my opponent the crowdfunding triggers, the 3 crowdfundings that came back, I think I would have been in a much more dominating position. Wouldn't have to rely on stupid Apocalypse bluff games in the end. Right? Okay, so that's that for the game analysis. Let's analyze Fetal AI's combos. Now, needless to say, Fetal AI combos very well with other cards that punish the runner for stealing agendas with net damage. The most notable of these are Personal Evolution, The Identity, and Ben Musashi. By amplifying the amount of net damage that the runner takes when they steal Fetal AI, it opens them up makes them more vulnerable to flatline kills using cards like Neuro EMP and Punitive Counter-Strike. So that's the obvious synergy. But I think there's a much more subtle and more crucial synergy with Fetal AI, and that is actually with the card Mushin no Shin, everyone's favorite card because it espouses the true, or rather the purest form of Netrunner. Mushin no Shin is actually, if you're looking to at any point to actually score Fetal AIs in your deck, or to install them on the table and advance them, you need to be running Mushin in your deck, all 3 copies of it. The reason is because even in a deck like mine, my Polana deck, I am never ever happy to install double advance of Fetal AI. That is terrible. If they steal my Fetal AI, I'm sad because now they get 2 agenda points and I wasted an entire turn install double advancing. If they don't steal the Fetal AI, if they leave it there, then I'm also sad because I spent 2 whole turns installing and quintuple advancing the Fetal AI for a measly 2 agenda points. It's a lose-lose situation for the court. Why would you put yourself in such a situation? Now, Mushin no Shin changes the entire ball game because it dramatically reduces the amount of investment you need to score the Fetal AI. Right? Instead of spending 4 clicks and 3 credits to get a Fetal AI with 3 advancement counters on it, all you need to do is to spend 2 clicks and 0 credits. That is a saving of 2 clicks and 4 credits. 2 clicks and 3 credits. That is a huge tempo save. 2 clicks and 3 credits can go very far in a game. So Motion No Shin is a huge so-called economy or engine card for Fetal AI that turns a lose-lose situation for a corp into a win-win situation. By motioning a Fetal AI, you present the runner with a lose-lose choice. They either steal the Fetal AI and actually take more of a tempo hit than you do, right? You lost 2 clicks playing Motion No Shin. They lost 2 net damage, 2 credits, and a click running the Fetal AI. Possibly more if you're running something like Personal Evolution. So Motion No Shin makes the worst case much more bearable and the best case also pretty bearable, right? If they don't run your Fetal AI that's Mushin, you simply double advance and you score 2 agenda points. Pretty okay. So Mushin No Shin, very important card to play with Fetal AI. Otherwise, if you're not running Mushin in a Fetal deck, you will never find yourself installing Fetal AI. It's just not worth it. Just go use your other agendas instead, right? That is the downside you have to live with when you're running a 5-2 defensive agenda. That's Fetal AI for you, and hope that has shared some interesting insight into Fetal AI's place in the current meta game. Thanks for watching as always, and happy net running. I'll see you in the next video.